In Yu-Gi-Oh's rich history, many cards have come and gone with the ever-flowing change of eras. In the process of time, cards have been introduced and also have been made to be good or bad. However, in the case of many, because of the never-stopping process and the lack of permanent ban lists, cards, sometimes are printed, are complete garbage, and this leaves them in an idle spot. However, there are times when cards actually have an impact, when they are released and they make a difference. And then, with the arrival of Age of Overlord, many believe our prayers had been answered, as some of the TCG exclusives have been thought to be meta warping for certain strategies, and they will be the focus of today's discussion. As many times as in other videos I've made, TCG exclusives usually tend to get the back seat and unfortunately become somewhat unplayable or just not good until a wave of support turns them well. And in the case of a few cards that we'll be talking about today, they will be the discussion as they're new, interesting, and support different strategies. First, we'll start with Gen, the Diamond Tiger. As his effect reads, once per turn, at the end of the battle phase, you can return this card from the field to the hand. And then you can only use each of the following effects of Gen the Diamond Tiger once per turn. During your main phase, you can special summon 1 Ken the Warrior Dragon from your hand or deck to your opponent's field and defense position. As an additional effect, if this card is special summoned by the effect of Ken the Warrior Dragon, you discard 1 card. And then moving into its aforementioned partner card, this is Ken the Warrior Dragon. As its effect reads, once per turn at the end of the battle phase, you can return this card from the field to the hand, and you can only use each of the following effects of Ken the Warrior Dragon once per turn. During your main phase, you can special summon Gen the Diamond Tiger from your hand or deck to your opponent's field and defense position. If this card is special summoned by the effect of Gen the Diamond Tiger, your opponent draws 2 cards, then they may discard 1 card. So at first, when you're reading these cards, both Ken and Gen are synergistic as they both intend to tutor each other out. However, instead of tutoring out to the field like something like Tour Guide to the Underworld, they tutor the monster to the other side of the field. And their effects trigger on the other side of the field. So what does this mean as a whole? First, this means that Ken, being the Warrior Dragon, is able to make your opponent discard 2 cards and then draw 1. Or actually, it's draw 2, discard 1. So effectively, it would necessarily be like a filter. However, because this goes to your opponent's field, and it says your opponent draws 2 cards and discard 1 card, this clearly means that you will be drawing 2 cards and then discarding 1. So effectively, what you do is Gen will allow you to turn your Ken into a filter. So that's pretty interesting as a whole, and vice versa with Gen the Diamond Tiger and Ken the Warrior Dragon. When you use the Warrior Dragon and you normal summon him, he will put Gen the Diamond Tiger on your opponent's field, and however, in this case, what it does is it forces your opponent, which would be now the controller of the card, to discard 1 card, basically punishing them in some extent by making them lose a card, but they get a monster. So effectively what this is they're trade-offs for each other. One benefits you more than the other by giving you a filter to draw, and the other one punishes your opponent but gives them a monster. So they're technically neutral. But why are they so important? As many people are focusing on the fact that these 2 cards are absolutely amazing for a deck like Dark World. Now, that is absolutely true to an extent, so kind of, but there's a limit to what this means. As although they are available for the Dark World archetype, the strategy seems to be more of a generic tutor strategy that we haven't necessarily seen yet, as these cards may have just been created as a way to boost certain decks. As I do know in Warrior decks, this actually could be a very interesting type of play where you normal summon either of them to simply either draw 2 or make your opponent discard 1, but simultaneously also turning off cards like Infinite Impermanence. So it is a little different. Also, there's also a myriad of things we could talk about. So we are going to talk about the benefits of these cards. So first and foremost, what is it? So specifically for Dark World, but in a few other decks, it allows you to start an engine. Because these cards are able to do different things, in Ken's effect, you're able to draw 2 and discard 1. This can turn on Dark World cards, obviously, but also for other decks, this allows you to mess around, as I think this actually isn't a very bad engine for a tier variant if someone wanted to build it, because you're able to discard 2 and draw 1, which isn't a conditionary thing, it's an effect, so these effects, your effects when they're sent to the graveyard, they will trigger, so it could start your plays that way, and it, as before, it will turn off infinite impermanence, which is actually very interesting. Also, the fact that they are filtering allows you to draw 2 and discard 1. So, for whatever reason, if you're playing this in a deck that kind of needs more drawing, you maybe need to see combo pieces, this wouldn't be that bad of an engine to throw in because it does have some generic benefits. Also, them being level 3 in Warrior, as mentioned before, does have its own like rule set of advantages because, you know, the fact that Warriors all kind of synergistic together and they have this balance that lets you do it. Also, with level 3 is also a very good level to have because a lot of great archetypes have been centered around level 3. Xyz level 3s are amazing. There's a lot to, to get there. And we're going to move into some of the issues. So, I have more issues than benefits, but it doesn't mean that the cards are bad. And the first thing's going to be, it's not searchable. So, yes, you can play Rhoda to search one of the Warriors, but in the decks that are most likely going to take advantage of Ken and Gen, they're not necessarily having any other way to tutor them or get to them. So that's like one of the bigger problems that this engine has, is that although, yes, they are Warriors, the decks that would benefit the most from them aren't going to be Warrior-based strategies, at least for right now, unless something else is coming. That's kind of one of the big issues I see. Also, unfortunately for the decks that want to run it, you have to run bricks. So, as most people would see, you're probably running 3 Gen the Diamond Tiger in order to play the 1 Ken the Warrior Dragon, because Ken is arguably the best one because it forces you, after you summon it, to draw 2 and discard 1. So, for Dark World players, it's insane if you have a handful of Dark World cards or just, want to start playing, or you need to fix your hand. So you might be able to find something off the 2 draws and then discard something that would trigger. So, fantastic that way. But, it's still, you have to run the bricks because there's a chance that even if you open up one or the other both in your hand, if you don't have any gas, the problem is using them is going to be an issue. So that falls there. Also, it will most likely take your normal summon, which is a big issue because they technically don't need to in terms of like you having to proc the effect. But if you look at the decks that are running them, unless you're playing some super combo variant deck that like has an additional special summon from something like maybe Saryuja, I don't really see how you would want to special summon out, Gen or Ken without having to normal summon them, because usually they look like play extenders to starters, and usually that means you'd have to normal. So unless you can dedicate your normal summon to it, then that's fine, but that's the point. Also, it's an easy disruption point. One of the bigger problems I think these cards have is at the moment you use it, people probably know what either strategy you're using, but more importantly than that, they know that they can just simply either Ash, Imperm, X, Y, and Z, right? Because it's not a effect that is going to actually stymie your opponent. It just means it's a point of interaction for them. So it lets them deal with that. And also, the payoff could bust. So this is for decks that are like maybe you're teching it out to see what they can do. Sometimes drawing 2 and discarding 1 is great, but depends on the strategy. Because if you draw into 2 cards you don't want to see and you want to search them, well, now you're going to be forced to have to decide what you want to do. And then it can mess up your whole plays. So yeah, that's kind of the issue with Gen and Ken as an engine. So there's that. But what does this mean for them as a whole? And where in the world will they be going? So, that's kind of the question here. One of the advantages, I think, is we have to think, what are the matchups that these cards will actually end up in? And the first thing I want to see is probably the hand loop Dark World strategy for the combos. That deck is going to take advantage of it. However, something like Tier is a deck that I see actually taking advantage of Ken and Gen. However, we would need to see like a bold player probably try it out, as I do think the engine's actually really unique. As I do see that if for whatever reason you decide to go with this engine, one of the things that's amazing is that by basically using the Gen to get Ken to their field and letting you draw to discard one, just allows you to like fix some issues with tier that we have now. Is like, you know, you have to kind of mill out cards that are good, but in this case what you could do is if you draw into cards or have an opening hand with cards you don't want to see, you can immediately put them to the graveyard to start playing. So I could see this as actually kind of like what we had before when people had 3 Havness. You can just do it on turn 1 maybe, obviously your turn, but the point is on your turn you could just give them the Ken and then you start playing. You could maybe send a Guido, Kelback, whatever you want to do, and start getting your plays off there, or even like discard Trivi Karmas because you can get cards. But the point is, this is why I think Ken and Gen are actually pretty, and I mean this, pretty good. I don't think they're bad. I think they're actually a lot better than people give them credit for, but I do think they need a little bit more refinement for like a deck that they can fit in. I just think it's going to take some time before players kind of figure out where to put it, because obviously people are going for Dark World because it needed something like this because they were really lacking in some way to really start. So I think this is a good way for Dark World to get like a starter, like a really good way to start, because a lot of the cards in a Dark World aren't starters, so they have to rely on a lot of other cards to help facilitate them. So like Genta, Gates of the Dark World, stuff like that. Really fantastic cards that they received from their structure deck, but they really needed help. And I do think Ken and Gen are there. I think other strategies can benefit from Ken and Gen. I think Tier is one that I think people are sleeping on if they haven't tried it, because I think the engine really does help out because it just gives an extra layer. But yeah, in the end, all I could really say is try them, because that's the key to making them better, is that try it out, see if it fits for you, really work on them. I would say, because the first thing I thought of was because I've always been a Warrior Goki player, and I mean like pure Goki Warriors, and then eventually I settled on just like the Warrior Hodgepodge of Goki, which is like getting out like a really big board, but I still play Goki monsters. Shout outs to Giant Ogre, he's a really good card. But point aside, these two cards I see could actually fit in pretty well. Because one thing I could see is if they do unban MX Saber Invoker, this would actually be a very decent engine to do with something like, what is it called? Junk Forward. Because I used to play Junk Forward, but I took it out because it doesn't really do anything except special summon itself. And in my build of Warriors, we don't really want to focus on like having we don't want to focus on cards that don't do more than they can. And Junk Forward only can special summon itself when I have no cards or no monsters. So point is, this is an actually really good engine to go with it. And it honestly kind of reminds me of a reverse like Speedroid Terratop, where like when you summon the monster, you summon it to your opponent's field, the one that you would normal summon out, but you get an effect. So this, in my theory, could allow you to unbrick. In a funny way, though, if you do give someone like, if you go in reverse and summon Ken and give them the Gen, one thing that's interesting is if they do have an extremely good hand, or they have like a really combo focused hand, like they don't want to reveal knowledge, because the effects force your opponent to discard when you give them, Gen, the Diamond Tiger, they're going to have to reveal something, right? So they put something in the grave, you immediately kind of know what they're doing. So that's honestly a plus, but also it could backfire. So that's kind of where I'm like, you need to like try it out, because I think in a tier match, this would be awful, is if you give them the Gen and then they're like, oh, okay, I just got to discard one card for the effect, and they discard something they want to trigger. And I'm like, ooh, that's not good. So yeah, just letting it out there, guys. I think Ken and Gen are actually pretty good, but also I want you guys to try it out. And this is probably where you thought the video was going to end, but I've got something else for you, just a little bit more to spice up this. Now, I actually have a bonus card for you, and this bonus card is actually going to be one of the other TCG exclusives we saw, but it's not for what its effect is, it's what it could possibly mean. So, first and foremost, I just want to get out of the way, Pit Knight Philly. Now, why is Pit Knight Philly going to be a bonus card to talk about? And this is the reason. One, we're seeing that we are getting another Pit Knight card. The first thing I thought was, I'm actually shocked we're getting another Pit Knight card. Now, it's not that we haven't had cards that have theming before. you know, we've seen this a lot, and more recently we've seen this with IP Masquerena and the SP Little Knight. My point is, a Pit Knight archetype wouldn't be too far-fetched to see. And the reason I'm telling you guys this is when you read Pit Knight Philly's effect, it focuses on like using the link to effect, like conditioning and banishing and giving the monsters with 1500 or less attack an ability to attack twice. So this at least makes me think that there may or may not be more Pit Knight monsters coming, especially with the arrows that Philly has. There being the two right and left arrows, meaning that this is a monster that you're probably supposed to put in the main monster zone. This could also just be the fact that they wanted you to have another connecting link monster, so, you know, don't read too much into it, guys, but I'm speculating that maybe we're getting a Pit Knight archetype. I do think that would actually be pretty cool, because I think the design so far has been pretty neat with Early and Philly, so I'll just be more considered on what they could do next. Are we going to get another link? Maybe we'll finally start getting some main deck monsters if it's possible. I mean, I just think that's an exclusive archetype that we're just getting small cards released for it. This would be neat. And absolutely, I think Pit Knights would actually be a pretty interesting archetype. I don't know what they do, but probably focus on weaker monsters, disrupting the opponent, stuff like that. But I just want to finish there. And thank you guys for watching. So as always, this is Brad from the Ad Army signing off. And for all of you out there to sign on.